The tickets were sitting on the kitchen counter, half hidden beneath yesterday's newspaper. The glossy paper caught the morning light, almost taunting me. I didn't need to pick them up to know what they were. The bold print across the top, "Cruise Reservation," was enough to send a chill straight through me. I just stood there holding my coffee mug with both hands, watching the steam rise while my stomach turned. What would you do if the people you trusted most used your sacrifice to fund their secret vacation? Stay with me, this is a revenge story you don't want to miss. 2 weeks ago, I had wired $2,800 for Dad's medical bills. My mother had said it so softly, almost trembling, like the words themselves carried a weight too heavy for her to bear. "We need you, sweetheart. Just this once." And I believed her. Of course I did. Family was supposed to mean something. Now the truth lay on that counter, shining under the pale morning sun. I didn't grab the tickets. I didn't rip them up. I didn't even move them out of sight. Instead, I pulled out the chair, sat at the table, and set my mug down on the coaster like it was any other morning. The smell of fried bacon still lingered from breakfast. A soft hum of the fridge filled the silence. My hands wrapped tighter around the warm ceramic. I stayed still, because anger makes noise and noise gives away what you know. When my father walked in, he didn't notice the way my eyes flicked to the counter. He whistled off-key, poured himself another cup of coffee, and shuffled back out, humming like a man without a care in the world. They thought I was blind. They thought I was soft. But I saw everything. That evening, the house filled with laughter. My parents sat in the living room, the TV on low, the sound of a laugh track competing with their own amusement. They were looking at brochures, flipping through pages of beaches and sunsets, circling ports with red ink. From the hallway I watched them. My mother waved a brochure in the air like a prize, her cheeks glowing with excitement. My father leaned back, smug like he had earned it all. And I sat quietly on the edge of the recliner, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my face carefully blank. Inside my chest burned. Not with the sharp fire of rage, but with the heavy, steady heat of betrayal. I let them laugh. I even smiled faintly when my mother turned toward me as if to include me. She didn't notice how my eyes lingered on the cruise line's logo, how my jaw tightened before I forced it loose again. At one point my father looked right at me. His smirk was almost playful, but behind it there was something else. Something that told me he knew I'd figure it out eventually. And in that moment I made my decision. Not to yell. Not to confront. Not yet. No, my plan needed silence. Silence was the sharpest blade I had, and I had learned to wield it well. I picked up my knitting, sat under the lamp, and let the needles click softly together. The sound was calming, steady, masking the thoughts racing through my head. They thought I was distracted. They thought I was harmless. And that was my hidden advantage. Later that night, after they went to bed, I returned to the kitchen. The house was dark except for the faint orange glow from the streetlight seeping through the curtains. The tickets were still there. I touched the corner of one, just lightly, feeling the thick, expensive paper beneath my fingertips. Departure date. Cabin number. Dining package. It wasn't just a trip. It was indulgence. Lavish, planned, deliberate. Paid for with my sacrifice. I pulled my hand back quickly as if the paper itself burned me. My chest rose and fell heavy, controlled. Instead of crumpling the tickets, I slid them neatly back into place, aligning the edges with the newspaper. No sign I had touched them. Because a secret is only useful if the other person doesn't know you have it. The following morning, I played my role perfectly. I made coffee, fried eggs, buttered toast. My voice was light, casual. "Going anywhere today?" I asked, pouring my mother's coffee just the way she liked it. 2 sugars, 1 cream. She shook her head quickly, almost too quickly, and waved me off. "Just errands, you know. Groceries, maybe the pharmacy." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her mug. I noticed. I always noticed. My father grunted from behind the paper, his eyes avoiding mine. "We'll be busy a while." That was when I knew they weren't just careless. They were aware, at least enough to lie. And liars reveal more with their pauses than their words. That afternoon I went into the garage under the excuse of looking for an old quilt. Instead, I found their suitcases lined neatly against the wall, already half-packed. Inside one, folded shirts still smelling of detergent. In another, a brand-new swimsuit with the price tag dangling. I brushed my hand over the tag, the glossy cardboard cool against my palm. It wasn't just betrayal. It was preparation. Calculation. They had been planning this for weeks, long before they called me crying about bills. I closed the suitcase slowly, careful to zip it back exactly as it was. My reflection stared back at me from the garage window. Older, lined, but steady. My eyes looked colder than I remembered. That evening, as they laughed again in the living room, I cooked dinner. The knife moved rhythmically through carrots, the cutting board thudding with each slice. The smell of onions stung my eyes, though I couldn't tell if it was from the vegetables or from the heat of my anger. When we sat at the table, the clink of silverware filled the air. They talked about nothing in particular. TV shows, weather, gossip about neighbors. But between their words, I heard the unspoken truth. They were mocking me. And still I stayed silent. Silence isn't weakness. It's preparation. The night ended like any other. My mother washed the dishes. My father settled into his recliner, the TV droning on. I kissed my mother's cheek, whispered goodnight, and went upstairs. But I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by the window in the dark, staring out at the quiet street. The air smelled faintly of rain. The clock ticked steadily on the nightstand. And in that darkness, I whispered to myself the words I hadn't yet said aloud. You've made a mistake. Not because they tricked me out of money. Not because they planned a trip without me. But because they thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't act. And that was the last mistake they would ever make. The next morning, I joined them at the breakfast table. My father folded his paper, my mother sipped her tea. The cruise tickets were gone from the counter. I smiled, calm, and let my eyes linger on both of them. Sleep well? I asked, my voice steady, casual. They both nodded, but I could see it. The flicker of unease, the way their eyes darted to each other before answering. Something in them knew. They didn't know what I had planned, not yet. But they knew something had shifted. And I leaned back in my chair, smiling faintly because I wanted them to feel it. The dread of a storm you can't quite see. My faint smile still lingered as I leaned back in my chair. They had nodded, both of them, pretending everything was fine. But I had seen it, the flicker of unease. The way their eyes darted to each other before they answered my harmless question. Sleep well. Such an ordinary phrase, yet it unsettled them. That was my first small victory. I didn't push it further. I didn't raise suspicion. Instead, I lowered my gaze to my tea, lifted the spoon, and stirred slowly until the clink of metal against porcelain filled the silence. That tiny sound carried more weight than words ever could. They shifted in their chairs. My father cleared his throat, my mother fussed with her napkin. They thought I hadn't noticed. But I always notice. And that was when I decided, the best way to fight them wasn't to shout or accuse. It was to disappear right under their noses. To become so unremarkable, so ordinary they wouldn't even remember I was in the room, until it was too late. It began with small things. I stopped offering opinions at the dinner table. If my father grumbled about the neighbors, I simply nodded. If my mother gossiped about a woman from church, I made a soft noise of agreement without looking up from my knitting. The less I said, the freer they spoke. They began talking openly as if my silence proved I wasn't listening. My father mentioned a second suitcase he'd hidden in the garage, one with cash tucked inside, just in case. My mother let slip about a credit card they'd opened without me knowing. They never realized each careless word fell neatly into my hands. It's funny, people think power comes from speaking. But it doesn't. It comes from listening. I also started adjusting my movements, training myself to glide around the house like a shadow. If they were in the living room, I lingered in the kitchen. If they sat at the table, I stayed at the sink, washing dishes with my back turned. Always present, never central. At first it was difficult. I had spent years filling silence with chatter, with polite questions and soft reassurances. Now I held my tongue. And in that holding I discovered something unexpected. A sense of freedom. By being invisible, I was no longer their daughter, their safety net, their bank account. I was something else, something sharper. One afternoon I tested my new invisibility. They were in the living room, the curtains half drawn, sunlight slanting across the floorboards. My father was asleep in his recliner, his mouth slightly open, a newspaper spread across his lap. My mother sat beside him, scribbling notes into a notebook. Numbers, dates, maybe even cruise details. I entered quietly, not saying a word. I stood for a full minute, watching her pen scratch across the page. She never looked up. I moved behind the couch, close enough to see the reflection of her writing in the glass of a framed picture on the wall. My heart beat hard, but my steps were soft, controlled. When she finally sighed and closed the notebook, I slipped away unnoticed. My hands trembled slightly as I returned to the kitchen. Not from fear but from exhilaration. They truly couldn't see me anymore. The house itself began to change for me. The creak of the third stair taught me where to step lightly. The hum of the refrigerator masked my movements at night. Even the old floorboards in the hallway became allies, warning me of when someone else approached. I knew when the mail arrived, when the lights flickered, when the faucet dripped twice instead of once. Every detail became part of my map. And they noticed nothing. My father still barked at the TV. My mother still muttered about bills. Their world stayed loud, blind, and careless. Mine became sharper, quieter, exact. It wasn't always easy. There were moments I almost gave myself away. Like the night I nearly laughed when my mother whispered, "She won't suspect a thing," thinking I was asleep upstairs. Or the morning my father complained about how tight money was, while slipping an envelope of cash into his jacket. I wanted to slam my fist on the table, scream that I wasn't a fool, that I saw every move they made. But I didn't. I breathed. I smiled faintly. And I remained invisible. Neighbors noticed the change, though. At church, Mrs. Callahan leaned closer to me during coffee hour. "You've gotten so quiet lately," she said gently, her brow furrowed. I gave her a soft smile. "Just keeping to myself," I murmured, sipping from my styrofoam cup. She patted my hand as if I were fragile. But fragility wasn't what I felt. No, what I felt was control. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence was armor. At home, my mother grew comfortable enough to leave papers lying around. Bills, receipts, even a letter from the cruise company confirming their itinerary. I didn't move them. I didn't touch them. I only looked, memorizing every number, every date. One evening, when she left her purse open on the chair, I saw the corner of a credit card slip out. My pulse raced, but I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Patience. Always patience. The hardest part was pretending to sleep. At night, I'd hear them whisper in their room, the door only half closed. My father's deep rumble, my mother's anxious murmur. They spoke about packing, about dates, about what excuse they'd give me when the time came. Sometimes I'd shift in bed, roll to my side, and clench my fists under the blanket to keep from storming in. But every time I reminded myself, storms make noise. Shadows don't. And I had chosen to be a shadow. Then came the slip. One afternoon, my father left his wallet on the counter while he went to answer the phone. I was standing at the sink, rinsing dishes. The leather was worn, cracked at the edges, but the flap was open just enough for me to see. Another credit card. Different from the one I'd glimpsed in my mother's purse. Second card. I kept scrubbing the plate slow and steady while my eyes burned into that wallet. When he returned, grumbling into the receiver, I dried my hands and left the room without a sound. But inside, I was already adding this new piece to my collection of secrets. By now, my silence had grown so normal that they barely noticed me at all. My mother would sigh to herself in the kitchen, muttering numbers aloud as if alone. My father would complain about bills, only to whisper about withdrawing a little more cash later that week. They believed their lies because they believed I wasn't listening. And that was their mistake. One evening after dinner, I tested the limits again. They sat in the living room, the glow of the lamp soft against the walls. My father's recliner squeaked as he shifted, my mother bent over her notebook. I entered quietly, knitting in hand, and sat at the far edge of the couch. Neither of them looked up. The only sound was the faint click of my needles. For 30 minutes I might as well have been a ghost. And I realized, with a strange calmness, that I had succeeded. I had erased myself from their awareness. But invisibility is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of a plan. And as I sat there, silent, knitting under the soft glow of the lamp, I felt the first stirrings of something colder, sharper, more deliberate. They had hidden from me. Now I was hiding from them. And soon they would realize that what they couldn't see could still destroy them. They couldn't see me, not really. And that was my strength. Sitting in the quiet glow of the lamp, knitting in hand, I felt it. That invisible wall between us. They had erased me from their awareness, treating me as harmless background. But what they didn't know was that background has ears. Background has memory. And every careless word they let slip became mine to keep. The first one came almost by accident. It was late, past midnight, when I heard my father grumble in the kitchen. The clatter of a spoon against a mug, the hiss of the kettle. He thought the house was asleep. I stayed still upstairs, only a thin slice of hallway light slipping under my door. Then I heard it, his voice low, muttering numbers under his breath. A password. He always repeated things aloud when he typed, a habit my mother teased him about. I whispered the numbers back to myself in the dark, each one pressing into my memory like a tack into corkboard. That was the moment I realized, I didn't need to confront them. I could dismantle them one digit at a time. After that, I listened more carefully. My mother had her own habits. Whenever she logged into her online account, she whispered the letters of her password like a prayer, her lips barely moving but sound slipping through anyway. I watched her one afternoon as she hunched over the dining table, typing furiously. She thought I was buried in my knitting, but my ears were sharp. R5, she breathed, almost inaudible. Rose 5. A simple password, careless and sentimental. My grandmother's name, I realized. My mother always used something she thought no one else would guess, but to me it was obvious. I wrote nothing down. I carried it in silence, hidden in the folds of memory where no one else could touch. The house became a chorus of secrets, and I was the only one listening. Bills arrived with overdue stamps. I heard my father curse softly under his breath as he tried to juggle payments. My mother sighed over statements, her pen scratching out notes she later stuffed into drawers. I collected it all. The sound of a safe door clicking shut told me more than any confession could. One night, I heard my mother whisper the code numbers as she twisted the dial, too tired to notice she was giving them away. 3 turns right. 2 turns left. Pause. The heavy door swung open. I memorized it, steadying my breath so the numbers sank deep inside me. It wasn't just numbers and codes. It was patterns. My father always used his birthday for PIN numbers, his favorite football team for security questions. My mother, sentimental as she was, used the names of pets we'd buried decades ago. They thought they were clever. But I had lived those details. I had buried those pets. I knew those birthdays. Their protections weren't walls. They were open doors with welcome mats, and I was already inside. Sometimes the knowledge felt heavy, almost too much to carry. One evening, as I folded laundry, I caught myself repeating their numbers softly under my breath. I stopped, heart racing, afraid I'd spoken too loudly. The dryer hummed, covering my slip. But still, I pressed a hand against my chest and whispered inside my head, patience. Not yet. This wasn't about revenge in a single strike. This was about precision. About waiting until the weight of all their lies balanced perfectly in my hands. There were close calls. Once my mother left her laptop open while she went to stir soup on the stove. The glow of the screen lit up the room, and my pulse jumped at the sight of her bank account page. I wanted to lean in, to memorize every number. But I didn't. I stood in the doorway, hands clasped, silent. She returned, tapped a key, and the screen went black. She never knew I had been standing there, watching, memorizing the rhythm of her keystrokes, the way her shoulders relaxed after entering the right code. Even without the numbers, I already knew enough. The more secrets I gathered, the lighter I felt. It was strange. Most people carry secrets like stones in their pockets, heavy, dragging them down. But me. Every password, every code, every careless phrase they let slip was a feather in my hand. Because each one made me less powerless. Each one gave me control they never intended me to have. At 65, people assume you're fading, soft, harmless. They think you can't keep track of details, that memory slips like water through fingers. But mine was sharp as glass. And they had forgotten who raised them, who paid bills, who balanced books for decades. They underestimated me. Small incidents fed my quiet collection. At the pharmacy, I overheard my father arguing with the clerk, insisting his card should work. He grumbled the last 4 digits under his breath as he pulled it from his wallet. I held those 4 digits like a clue, fitting them into the bigger picture. At church, my mother whispered to Mrs. Callahan about keeping a little stash aside. She didn't realize I was behind her, straightening hymn books, her voice carrying back to me. Every whisper, every slip. Mine. The nights grew longer. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, repeating their secrets in order. Not out of fear of forgetting, but to make sure the pattern stayed clear. Numbers. Birthdays. Codes. Names. A tapestry of betrayal woven through digits and syllables. And every night I reminded myself, do not act yet. Do not waste the power of silence. One particular moment stayed with me. My father sat at the desk trying to log into his account. Frustration built as he tapped the keys. Finally, he groaned and muttered, "Always the same blasted password. Why can't I remember it?" My mother called from the kitchen, "Try the football team and the year we married." I froze. The words hung in the air like an unlocked door swinging wide open. I smiled faintly at my knitting, pretending I wasn't listening. But inside I was laughing. They weren't just careless. They were predictable. And predictability is the death of power. Sometimes I wondered if they sensed it. There were nights my mother looked at me a second too long, her brow furrowed as if she wondered what I was thinking. My father grew more irritable, snapping when I didn't respond to his muttering. But then they brushed it off. To them I was simply quiet, withdrawn, maybe tired. That was the beauty of invisibility. They explained it away from me. One rainy afternoon I sat by the window, the rhythm of raindrops steady against the glass. My knitting lay untouched in my lap. I wasn't thinking of stitches. I was thinking of numbers. Each digit glowed in my mind, bright as lightning. I could hear my father's mutter, my mother's whispers, the click of the safe, the sigh of relief when codes worked. I closed my eyes and whispered them back to myself, stringing them together like pearls on a necklace. The storm outside grew louder, but inside me there was only calm. Because I knew the truth. Every password they shared had become my weapon. And I was ready to use it. And when the chance came, I didn't hesitate. The day they left for their cruise was quiet. No grand goodbyes, no invitations extended to me. My mother fussed with her scarf, checking her purse twice before locking the front door. My father carried the suitcases out with that smug heaviness in his walk, as if he deserved every bit of comfort waiting for him at sea. I watched from the window as the taxi pulled away. Their laughter echoed faintly through the glass, muffled but unmistakable. The house fell silent. Finally. That silence was my cue. I didn't waste time. I sat down at the desk, opened the laptop and let my fingers hover over the keys. My pulse was steady, not frantic. I typed the first password I had memorized. Then the second. Each one worked exactly as I knew it would. Bank accounts. Credit cards. Bills. Reservations. Every secret they had shared with their own carelessness now lay open before me. I didn't take everything at once. That would have been reckless. Instead, I chipped away piece by piece like pulling threads from a sweater until the whole thing unraveled. First, I redirected their emergency cash to an account they didn't know existed. Then I set up small transfers, automatic and quiet, amounts just low enough to go unnoticed until it was too late. By the second day, I had frozen 2 of their cards with a few simple clicks. Suspicious activity, the screen confirmed. Suspicious indeed. The house itself felt different with them gone. I moved freely, no longer a shadow but a surgeon at work. I opened drawers, checked files, photographed papers with my phone. Each discovery fit neatly into the puzzle I'd been building for weeks. In the garage, I found the suitcase my father had mentioned tucked behind paint cans. Inside, envelopes of cash bound with rubber bands. I counted each stack slowly, savoring the weight in my hands before slipping it into my own hiding place. Upstairs, I opened the safe with the code I had memorized. Jewelry glinted under the dim light. I didn't take it, not yet. I simply held a necklace against my throat, staring into the mirror, imagining my mother's shock when she realized the lock had never kept me out. I placed everything back exactly as I found it. Not a crease out of place. Because the best revenge isn't about theft, it's about erasure. At night, I allowed myself small luxuries they'd denied me. I made tea with the expensive bags my mother saved for guests. I spread the good quilt on my bed, the one she always kept folded in the cedar chest. I even opened a bottle of wine my father had hidden behind the pantry flower. Each sip tasted like justice, like proof that what was theirs was already mine to command. And still I stayed patient. By the 5th day the pieces were falling into place. Their airline confirmations vanished. Their hotel reservations cancelled with a few keystrokes. I left just enough evidence of errors that customer service would blame the system, not them. I didn't delete everything. I wanted them to come home to confusion, not clarity. Half charges, missing funds, accounts suspended. A world unraveling but not yet in ruins. Because ruin, true ruin, takes time. When the taxi finally returned 2 weeks later, I stood in the hallway, hidden in the shadows near the stairwell. I heard their voices before the door opened. Tired, irritable, no trace of vacation joy. My father shoved the suitcase through the doorway with a grunt. My mother sighed, muttering about credit card declines on the ship, about how she had to argue with staff just to pay for meals. The door slammed shut and I slipped quietly back into the kitchen, waiting for the show to begin. It didn't take long. Within the hour, my father was at the desk, fumbling with his login. "Why is this frozen?" he growled, tapping the keyboard harder with each failed attempt. My mother rummaged through her purse, her voice rising as she counted her cash. "This isn't right. I had more than this. Where did it go?" Their panic filled the house like smoke. I sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, knitting resting in my lap. The clink of my spoon against the cup cut through their shouting. Neither of them noticed me sitting there. Or maybe they did, but they didn't see me. Not really. The days that followed were a symphony of unraveling. Calls to the bank. Long waits on hold. My father's temper boiling over as he slammed the phone down. My mother pacing, her voice tight with fear as she begged for answers. Each time they thought they'd fixed something, another problem appeared. Accounts drained. Credit limits cut. Bills arriving with red stamps. I moved around them quietly, setting plates on the table, folding laundry, knitting under the lamp. Silent. Invisible. Watching as their confidence crumbled piece by piece. One afternoon, I walked past the living room to find them surrounded by papers. Bank statements, overdue notices, empty envelopes. Their voices were hushed now, sharp with accusation. "You should have paid more attention," my mother snapped. "You were supposed to keep track," my father shot back. Their blame circled like vultures, tearing at each other instead of me. I paused in the hallway, a soft smile tugging at my lips. For once, I wasn't their target. The house grew colder. Meals became quieter. My mother stopped humming while cooking. My father stopped whistling in the mornings. The weight of their own lies pressed down, and I didn't need to add a word. Silence remained my sharpest blade. One evening, my father slammed his fist against the desk, startling even me. "It's gone," he said flatly, his face pale. "The savings. All of it." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "All of it. Every last penny." I stirred sugar into my tea, the spoon clinking softly. Their eyes flicked toward me just for a moment. Suspicion flashed, but then it was gone. They dismissed me as they always did. And that dismissal was their downfall. In the nights that followed, I listened to them whisper. Fear now replaced their smugness. My father muttered about loans, my mother about selling jewelry. Their voices shook. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, calm. My plan had worked. I hadn't just taken their money. I had taken their certainty, their control, their comfort. They had returned from vacation expecting home to be a sanctuary. Instead they found ruins. Ruins I had built quietly, stitch by stitch, like one of my quilts. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because erasing their wealth was only the beginning. What I wanted most wasn't just their money. It was their realization. The moment they would look at me, not through me, and finally see what their betrayal had created. That moment was still to come. And I would savor it. And it came the next morning. The air in the house was heavy, thick with silence broken only by the rustle of papers on the dining table. My parents sat across from each other, hollow-eyed, surrounded by bank statements and overdue notices spread like debris after a storm. The lamp above cast a yellow glow, making their faces look older, worn down by fear. I stood in the kitchen doorway, tea in hand, watching them squirm in the very ruins they'd built. My father muttered under his breath. My mother clutched her rosary as if prayer could replace dollars. Neither of them noticed me at first. Not until I pulled out the chair and sat at the end of the table, the wood creaking under my weight. The sound startled them both. Their eyes darted to me, really to me, for the first time in weeks. "You've been quiet," my father said slowly, suspicion lacing his tone. "Yes," I answered simply, stirring my tea. "I have." My mother's voice cracked. "Do you know what's happening?" I met her gaze, calm and steady. "I know exactly what's happening." They froze. The words hung between us, heavier than any scream. For years they had treated me as background noise, a silent fixture in the house, useful only when needed. But now the silence wasn't their comfort. It was their punishment. I set my spoon down gently, the clink ringing sharp. "You remember asking me to cancel my trip to Tahoe?" I said, my voice low but steady. My father shifted, his jaw tightening. My mother looked down at her hands. You told me it was for bills. Dad's expenses. You looked me in the eye and swore you needed me. They didn't answer. But then, I continued, leaning forward, I found the tickets. The cruise. The suitcases you packed behind the paint cans in the garage. The cash you stashed in envelopes. Every detail you thought I was too blind, too old, too weak to notice. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. My father's face flushed red. How? He began. Because you underestimated me, I cut in. You always have. The room trembled with their silence. Then slowly I reached into my pocket and pulled out the smallest thing I owned. A penny. I set it on the table, the copper coin catching the dim light. Do you know what I left you? I asked softly. My father's brows knit together. My mother shook her head. 1 cent, I said. In every account. Just one. Enough so you'd know it wasn't an accident. Enough so you'd know someone had taken everything but left a mark. My father slammed his fist on the table, papers scattering. You? Yes, I said calmly, cutting through his anger like glass. Me. Their faces contorted, shock, rage, fear, all fighting for space. You used me like an A-team, I continued. I canceled my plans, I gave you my savings, and you laughed behind my back while you drank cocktails on a ship I paid for. So I made sure the life you thought you had disappeared the way I did. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. We didn't mean. Don't lie, I snapped, sharper than I intended. Then I steadied my breath, let my voice return to calm. You meant every bit of it. You planned it. You counted on me not noticing. You counted on me being silent. I leaned back, folding my hands neatly in my lap. And you were right. I was silent. But silence isn't weakness. It's patience. My father's shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him as the truth sank in. My mother buried her face in her hands, sobs muffled. For the first time they weren't laughing. For the first time they were small. And for the first time I felt tall. I stood slowly, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape. You asked me for help. And I gave it. More than once. But you didn't need help. You needed someone to rob and you chose me. Now you know what that choice cost you. I reached for my tea, lifted it calmly and took one last sip. The warmth slid down my throat, steadying me. I'm leaving, I said. Not just this table. Not just this house. I'm leaving you to sit with the mess you created. And all you'll have to remind you of me are those pennies. Their voices followed me as I walked toward the stairs. My mother begged, desperate. My father cursed hollow. But I didn't turn back. I climbed each step slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders with every rise. The third stair creaked as always, but this time the sound didn't feel like a warning. It felt like closure. In my room I closed the door softly. I looked around at the packed bag waiting in the corner, the small suitcase that held only what I needed. Clothes. Papers. My knitting. My dignity. Everything else could burn with the ruins of their lies. When I left the house that night, the air was crisp, the stars faint above the dark street. The world felt wide, open, full of possibility. Behind me, through the window, I saw the glow of the lamp where they still sat, hunched over empty accounts, broken trust, and copper coins. I walked down the street, each step steady, each breath lighter. They had wanted my money. They had wanted my silence. I gave them both. And in return I took everything. I didn't feel guilty. Not once. Because this wasn't theft. This was balance. This was justice. This was dignity reclaimed after years of being dismissed, used, and underestimated. At 65 I had been written off as harmless. Invisible. Forgettable. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I was unforgettable. I paused at the corner, turned one last time toward the house, and whispered softly into the night. You'll never erase me again. Because I erased you first. Then I kept walking. They thought silence made me weak. But silence was the weapon that left them with nothing, and me with everything that mattered. If this story made you feel seen, betrayed, or empowered, hit subscribe. I share more dark, emotional revenge stories every week. And you deserve to hear them all.